This episode of the CyberWire is made possible in part by Logarithm. There's a lot riding on the shoulders of cybersecurity operations teams, a company's reputation, a hospital's health records, an entire community's drinking water, the weight of protecting the world. It's a load Logarithm helps lighten. Logarithm's engineers and analysts have been on the front lines of many of the world's most significant attempted cyberattacks. As allies in the fight, Logarithm helps busy and lean security operations teams close gaps in manpower, increase knowledge of new attacks and techniques, and save the day, day after day. Learn more at logarithm.com. Concerns persist that President Putin will take his revenge in cyberspace for sanctions. Wiper attacks are reported continuing in Ukraine. Russia also sustains cyber attacks. Lapsus living at home with mom. A Carter kingpin finds his way into the FBI's most wanted list. Andrea Little Limbago from Interos on collective resilience. Our guest is Amit Shaked from Laminar Security on shadow data. And Anonymous says it hit Nestlé, but Nestlé says never happened. From the CyberWire studios at Data Tribe, I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire summary for Thursday, March 24th, 2022. Large-scale Russian cyber attacks against Western targets haven't so far materialized, but governments aren't prepared to drop their guard. It strikes many policymakers, Newsweek reports, that Russian President Putin may turn to cyber attacks as retaliation for Western sanctions. U.S. Representative Jason Crow, a Democrat from Colorado's 6th District, a member of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Cyber, Innovative Technologies, and Information Systems, told Newsweek that, quote, Putin will use the tools at his disposal to respond, and the biggest one that he has is cyber. So I think we can fully expect that there'll be cyber attacks on the United States and our allies in weeks and months ahead. I think we can expect Putin to come at our financial system and some of our critical infrastructure, end quote. So far, the cyber attack that disrupted Viasat's service is the one cyber incident that's had significant effects beyond the borders of Ukraine, Wired reports. That attack remains under investigation and hasn't been definitively attributed to Russia. France 24 points out another possibility. Russia might consider severing undersea cables that carry much of the world's internet traffic. This is more a report of a priori possibility based on known capabilities than a conclusion based on specific indicators and warning. Cable cutting has a long wartime history going back to the First World War. Russia has not departed from the line it took even before its invasion began. The Russian embassy to the U.S. tweeted a representative statement back on February 18th, quote, we categorically reject these baseless statements of the administration and note that Russia has nothing to do with the mentioned events and, in principle, has never conducted and does not conduct any malicious operations in cyberspace, end quote. Eric Cheen, security threat researcher at Symantec Threat Intelligence, emailed us to say that his team is seeing signs that wiper attacks, specifically using variants of hermetic wiper, are continuing against Ukrainian networks. As he put it, quote, very anecdotal, and while it hasn't really been in the news because it overall may not be material given the kinetic actions, the actual wiper attacks in Ukraine have not stopped. We just saw a variant of hermetic wiper deployed again yesterday on an organization we saw previously affected. And also, on March 14th, we saw a variant of hermetic wiper deployed on an organization that we also saw affected on the first day of the war. Communication with organizations in Ukraine is difficult, but our understanding is that for most of these organizations, they are far more impacted by the kinetic effects in their country, end quote. Anonymous continues its nuisance-level hacktivism against Russian targets, most recently by hijacking printers to publish anti-war messages to Russian audiences. About 160 printers were compromised to send more than 40,000 messages into Russia, according to HackRead. The IT Army of Ukraine, which is more militia than hacktivist collective, has been operating with more official direction. CNBC puts the total number of members of the IT Army as somewhat more than 311,000. One IT Army member said of the Russian enemy, quote, "We want them to go to the Stone Age, and we're pretty good at this," end quote. Bloomberg reports that the leading intellects behind the Lapsus Gang may be a couple of teenagers, one in the UK, the other in Brazil. Researchers at two prominent Lapsus targets, Microsoft and NVIDIA, say they've traced one of the teens to Oxfordshire, England. In view of the British teens' tender years, Bloomberg isn't revealing their name, but they do report that they go by the hacker name White and Breachbase. The police have yet to accuse Breachbase of any crime. Apparently, rival hackers put Bloomberg onto them. Quote, "The teenage hacker in England has had their personal information, including their address and information about their parents, posted online by rival hackers," end quote. The reporters haven't spoken to Breachbase, but they were able to talk to their mum through the doorbell intercom. She said she knew nothing of the allegations, was upset that her child had been the subject of harassment, and that she was calling the police. Police in the Thames Valley and in San Francisco, who are investigating Lapsus, declined to comment. Lapsus, which was apparently motivated in part by a thirst for notoriety, may now have more of it than they're finding comfortable. Bloomberg quotes one of the gang's accounts. "A few of our members has a vacation until the 30th of March 2022. We might be quiet for some times," the hacker wrote in their Telegram channel. "Thanks for understand us. We will try to leak stuff ASAP. Stay tuned." The U.S. FBI has added accused Russian Carter kingpin Igor Dyekyarchuk to its most wanted list. He's charged with wire fraud, aiding and abetting access device fraud, trafficking in unauthorized access devices, and other crimes. And finally, to return to Russia's war against Ukraine and the sometimes wayward aim of the hacktivists engaged therein, Anonymous claims to have compromised Nestlé's corporate network. The hacktivist collective says it extracted 10 gigabytes of sensitive data, which it subsequently dumped on the internet in protest against the company's failure to have completely suspended operations in Russia. But this seems to be mistaken exaggeration at best. Data were indeed exposed, but Nestlé says, according to the Register, that their networks weren't in fact compromised. The data, the company says, originated with, quote, "a case from February this year when some randomized and predominantly publicly available test data of a B2B nature was unintentionally made accessible online for a short period of time on a single business test website," end quote. Nestlé investigated and found the exposure to be trivial. In a separate move, lest any hacktivists decide to take a real whack at them, Nestlé expressed its solidarity with Ukraine and said it was limiting sales in Russia to baby food and hospital nutrition products. Specifically, Mr. Lavrov will henceforth lack access to Kit Kats and Nesquik. Nestlé's distinction among its products is difficult to fault on humanitarian grounds, and their statement is worth quoting in full. Quote, "As the war rages in Ukraine, our activities in Russia will focus on providing essential food, such as infant food and medical and hospital nutrition, not on making a profit. This approach is in line with our purpose and values. It upholds the principle of ensuring the basic rights to food. Going forward, we are suspending renowned Nestlé brands, such as Kit Kat and Nesquik, among others. We have already halted non-essential imports and exports into and out of Russia, stopped all advertising, and suspended all capital investment in the country. Of course, we are fully complying with all international sanctions on Russia. While we do not expect to make a profit in the country or pay any related taxes for the foreseeable future in Russia, any profit will be donated to humanitarian relief organizations. This is in addition to the hundreds of tons of food supplies and significant financial assistance that we have already contributed to support the people in Ukraine and refugees in neighboring countries. And these efforts will continue. We stand with the people of Ukraine and our 5,800 employees there." End quote. Nicely said, Nestlé. And now, a word from our sponsor, SpyCloud. SpyCloud constantly recovers and analyzes new data from the criminal underground, a realm packed with credentials, personal information, passwords, and customer information exposed in third-party data breaches, combo lists, and malware infections. With SpyCloud, you now have access to this data that historically has not been available and can take preventative efforts to defend your business against costly cyber attacks and hard-to-detect fraud that can negatively impact your bottom line and brand reputation. Visit spycloud.com/cyberwire to learn how to make recaptured data your best defense. That's spycloud.com/cyberwire. And we thank SpyCloud for sponsoring our show. Trying to imagine the amount of data storage in the cloud is kind of like trying to fathom the distance between galaxies in space. At some point, the numbers get so big it's just not possible for our brains to comprehend in any meaningful way. For cloud storage, the abundance of available storage can lead to organizations losing sight of what they have and where they have it. Amit Shaked is CEO and co-founder at cloud data security firm Laminar, and I caught up with him for a lesson on shadow data.
Shadow data refers to all the data stores, databases, data lakes, and warehouses that are largely unknown to the organization. And this can be running a data store or a backup or a copy or a log file or even just a data in a table format that's hiding in your environment. And shadow data is more likely to be misconfigured and unmonitored and also violate your data security and then privacy policies. And what we find is that very often shadow data is not even used. Like it can sit there for months or even years in an environment without anybody using it and without creating any revenue for the organization. But this whole time, it's a wonderful target for the attackers.
So what are the ways in which shadow data is typically created here? Is this a matter of folks just sort of going about their day-to-day business and forgetting that they've copied something and stuck it in a folder for their convenience, things like that?
Yes, exactly. It's part of the day-to-day work, and it's part of what comes with the cloud transformation. And actually, it's the combination of the cloud transformation that just drives developers or make it easy for developers and data scientists to leverage data more easily, to create, store, and the data democratization that kind of encourages them to do it more freely. So the combinations of these two just creates more and more data stores, and combined with the lack of gatekeepers, it means that security teams are not always aware of all these data stores that are being created and used. And this lack of gatekeepers is just because modern security organizations don't want to stop developers from leveraging data, right? They want to enable them to do it more and more. But what it means is that they're no longer always part of the process of creating and leveraging this data. So they lost the opportunity to ask very important questions about the data, like what is this data used for? How is it protected? Who do you share it with? And so having more and more data stores without security and data teams awareness creates all these shadow data. And that's kind of the, let's say, motivators and drivers for that. And I'm happy to also share some examples for shadow data that we find with our clients.
Well, help me understand then, how do we go about preventing this? It seems to me like, data storage is cheap enough to practically be free. And I can understand users having a bit of a pack rat mentality of saying, I'm just going to set this aside until I need it. And why delete it if it's not really causing me any trouble? Who knows when I may need this again?
Yes, exactly. So you're almost right. It is exactly the mentality of developers. And I'll also say that it's always very scary to delete a database. Maybe someone else is using it. So it's way easier to create one than delete it. But it's not that data is free. Actually, data is one of the main cost drivers in the cloud. It's just not that the people that are creating it are not the people that are paying for it. So yes, this is a huge cost in the cloud.
And so what do you propose here? How can organizations get on top of this?
As you said, the abundance of data stores means that in modern enterprises, there can be thousands or even tens of thousands of data stores. With that, millions of different files that can be stored within them. So manually go one by one and trying to find shadow data is not really effective. So automation here is the key, right? You need continuous and automated, first of all, discovery of data stores and of shadow data, of security, like how this shadow data is configured, and also in terms of access monitoring. So who is actually accessing this shadow data? So you need this continuous monitoring embedded within your environment, embedded within your cloud, embedded into the CI/CD pipe.
That's Amit Shaked from Laminar. And now, a word from our sponsor, KnowBe4. There's a reason more than half of today's ransomware victims end up paying the ransom. Cybercriminals have become thoughtful, taking time to maximize your organization's potential damage and their payoff. After achieving root access, the bad guys explore your network, reading email, finding data troves, and once they know you, they craft a plan to cause the most panic, pain, and operational disruption. Ransomware has gone nuclear. The folks at KnowBe4 have an on-demand webinar that will get you up to speed on ransomware. In this webinar, you'll find out why data backups, even offline backups, won't save you, why ransomware isn't your real problem, and how your end users can become your best last line of defense. Go to knowbe4.com/ransom to learn more about the webinar. That's knowbe4.com/ransom. And we thank KnowBe4 for sponsoring our show. And I'm pleased to be joined once again by Andrea Little Limbago. She is the Vice President of Research and Analysis at Interos. Andrea, it's always great to have you back. I want to touch base with you today on something I know you've had your eye on, and that is this notion of collective resilience. Can we dig into that? What exactly are we talking about there?
Yeah, and thanks, Dave, for having me back. I think we spend a lot of time, appropriately, highlighting some of the challenges and the attacks and the offensive measures that are going on and the innovations that are going on. And absolutely need to cover that. But I think there's been much less focus on some of the innovation that's going on the defensive side. And I think there's been a lot going on in that area over the last couple of years, really moving away from, we've heard, for way too long, the perimeter is dead and so forth. And some of that kind of stops and it's become kind of marketing and so forth. But we're seeing some really interesting movements as toward, what can we do to be working together as defenders to build up all of our own collective security, our own collective resilience against the onslaught of cyber attacks that are going on. And it was a couple of years ago, around May of 2020, that CISA put out a blog really focusing on how to build collective resilience for the ICT supply chain. And in there, they walk through really how both obviously critical infrastructure is necessary to protect, but that can't be done alone. That really does need to be public sector, private sector together, working together, in really interesting and innovative ways. And that's how we will, as a society, build up this notion of collective resilience against the attacks. That each of us going off on our own, doing our own thing, really doesn't help out that much. It really does have to be greater coordination. And on one hand, it's easy to make sense when you say it, but in reality, it becomes very, very difficult.
Is this sort of the cyber equivalent of a neighborhood watch?
Yes, although even with neighborhood watch, you do worry about some of those. You've heard like the social medias have gone sort of gone crazy. So we want to avoid. We want the benefits of some of the neighborhood watch, but avoid some of the craziness that goes along with it. But it is thinking along the lines of what can we be doing together? And so some good examples are there was a joint simulation of a cyber attack on a global financial system that the IMF put out. And this is on one hand, be like, this was just in this December of 2021. And so you'd think that, I'm sure the IMF has done things like this, for years, but no, it was the first time they had done sort of this joint, basically wargaming of what different, they brought countries, I think about 10 different countries together to do this joint war game on what would happen if there was a cyber attack on the financial system. And that kind of coordination and cooperation, is necessary, right? I mean, we talk about these negative kind of events happening, but haven't really focused on bringing the various groups together to help address those. And we see a lot of it going on within companies or within a country, but not necessarily across those areas, across those boundaries that normally tend to exist. And so we're seeing numerous instances of that where we're seeing both at the strategic level, countries starting to come together to see how they can create defenses together or policies that align together. And we see it all the way down to the tactical level where we're seeing a lot of just open source contributions, for instance, on how to help build supply chain security and open source software as well, into your security system. And so that's really interesting to see. There's at least almost like half a dozen different efforts right now of open source software that's been created to help companies and individuals writ large really spot vulnerabilities, how to assess the integrity of their digital supply chain. And that's in the open source area. And you've got the Linux Foundation, open web application folks are doing work in this area. And so it's really, you see it all the way, almost from the grassroots and open source community all the way up to the highest levels of governments and then international government organizations thinking of and pursuing interesting and novel ways for collaboration to help strengthen our defenses.
One thing I've noticed in doing our Research Saturdays show with the folks that I talk within research arms of organizations where, you have these organizations that public-facing are competitors, but the researchers behind the scenes have channels to share information with each other. And that's a big part in the success of what they do, that of making sure that they're able to bounce things off of each other, share things for the greater good.
And that's exactly right. And that's when you think a lot about information sharing, and we think about the information sharing communities, and those are very important. That's the more formalized mechanisms that you need. But to your point, the informal avenues I'd argue, are just as important, because those are the ones that are very timely. You know who you can call if you have a question, and you can get that answer right away. You don't have to deal with various kinds of bureaucracies limiting some of that collaboration. And so the formal mechanisms are 100% necessary, but these informal ones really are a great way for researchers to help each other out and to help get that real-time awareness of what may be going on and help spread that word. And so, again, I think it goes back to as well, it's one of the benefits of having some of the in-person conferences that we used to have, where a lot of those conversations would happen, where people could meet other people working in those areas. And the hybrid has been the virtual has been great for exposing greater audience. But I think the more that we can help promote those informal means as well for the researchers to meet each other, connect with their community in this area, I think that's just an essential part of the security community is that sharing through those means.
Yeah. All right. Well, Andrea Little Limbago, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This episode of the CyberWire is made possible in part by Trellix. Security threats are evolving, but so is your company. Bring your security to life. Learn more at Trellix.com. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. The CyberWire podcast is proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our amazing CyberWire team is Liz Urban, Elliot Peltzman, Trey Hester, Brandon Karpf, Eliana White, Puru Prakash, Justin Sabi, Tim Nodar, Joe Kerrigan, Carol Terrio, Ben Yellen, Nick Valecki, Gina Johnson, Bennett Moe, Chris Russell, John Petrick, Jennifer Iben, Rick Howard, Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow. And now, a word from our sponsor, Trellix. Today, there's a new way to look at security, not just as a cause for concern, but as an opportunity to better your business. With a living security solution from Trellix, you can face your future with confidence, knowing that every day you're getting smarter and more agile. Threats are evolving, but so is your company. When you have a platform that's always learning and adapting, you can stay one step ahead of the threats. Incidents are on the rise, but your organization can rise above them. By tapping into open partnerships and native connections, you can respond to incidents in real time. Risk management is growing more complex, but your business has what it takes to overcome complexity. With embedded tools and expert insights, you can make risk management easy. Bring your security to life with Trellix. And we thank Trellix for sponsoring our show.